Before I share my story, there's something you need to understand. Sometimes God asks us to do something that seems small, but it requires a huge leap of faith. It might be a simple gesture, a word spoken at just the right moment, or even a decision that completely challenges us. And most of the time, we don't understand the why in that moment. Only later do we realize he was weaving something much bigger. What I'm about to share isn't about money or rewards. It's about obedience. It's about listening to God's gentle voice in the middle of life's noise and having the courage to act, even when you don't know what comes next. Because in the end, obedience always reveals his faithfulness. My story begins in Worcester, Massachusetts, during what I thought was just an ordinary season of my life. At least, that's what I believed until one Sunday service changed everything. Waking up early, making a quick cup of coffee, and braving the cold in Worcester, Massachusetts, that was my routine, almost like I was living on autopilot. Between work and church, my days passed by like the pages of a book you read without really paying attention. I always said my life was stable, and it was. But deep down, I also knew that too much stability can turn into complacency. I went to services, said my prayers, but I often wondered if God still wanted something more from me, beyond simply showing up and doing my part. At the office, my work was recognized, but it was rarely surprising. My desk was always neat, my tasks were up to date, and I had a cordial relationship with my coworkers. Yet, even in that setting, I could sense a quiet echo inside me, as if there was a space waiting to be filled with something greater. It's strange how you can be surrounded by people, yet still feel a kind of loneliness that only faith can explain. It wasn't sadness. It was a subtle restlessness, like when the wind changes and you just know a storm might be on its way. At church, I sang in the choir, helped with activities, and knew every face that walked through the doors on Sunday mornings. Still, I felt like my story with God was about to turn a page. It was like catching the smell of fresh bread before you even see it in the oven. Something was being prepared. I just had no idea that before long, my faith would be tested in a way that would touch every part of my life. That Sunday, I woke up with a strange feeling. It wasn't tiredness or laziness. It was as if something was pulling me more strongly to go to church. The air in Worcester was colder than usual, but even with the biting wind, there was an unexplainable warmth in my chest. As soon as I walked into the sanctuary, I could tell something was different. I'm not sure if it was the music, the way people were praying, or if it was God preparing something. But the atmosphere felt heavier, as if heaven itself had drawn closer to us. Pastor Gerald Foster stepped up to the pulpit with a look I knew well. When he had that look, it meant a direct word was coming. No soft edges, no avoiding the truth. He began speaking about radical obedience. Not the partial kind we offer when it's convenient, but the kind that demands complete surrender. Every sentence felt like it was piercing right through my heart, and I couldn't help but ask myself, am I really ready to obey God that deeply? It's easy to sing about trust when everything is under control, but what about when it's not? As his words echoed in the room, I felt something inside me shift, as if God was realigning my heart. I didn't know why, but it was like he was preparing me to say yes to a request that hadn't even been made yet. And even without understanding, one thing was certain. That service wasn't just another Sunday in my story. Something was about to change, and it wouldn't be small. In the middle of the service, while the choir was singing, my eyes wandered to a corner of the church. That's when I saw Monica Blake. I had seen her around before, a single mother, always with her 2 young children, but that day, something was different. Her eyes seemed distant, as if she were trying to hold back an ocean of worries behind a faint smile. It was the kind of expression you only understand if you've been through something heavy yourself. Ethan, her oldest, was fidgeting with his coat, while little Sophie nestled in her lap. Monica tried to keep her composure, but the way she took deep breaths gave away the weight she was carrying. I had seen tired faces before, but there was something about hers that stirred something deep inside me. I can't quite explain it. It was as if God had placed an invisible spotlight on her, making her stand out in the middle of so many people. I felt my heart race, as if I was about to be given a mission I hadn't asked for. I didn't know exactly what I was supposed to do, but I knew it was no accident that my eyes had met hers at that moment. It felt like Monica's story was about to intertwine with mine in a way that would change us both forever. It happened during the silent prayer. Amid the distant sound of guitars and the soft murmur of people praying around me, I felt something different. It wasn't my own thought, nor a passing idea. It was that gentle voice that doesn't shout, but speaks straight to the heart. Help her. In that very moment, I knew it was about Monica. It wasn't about a symbolic gesture, but something tangible, giving part of my paycheck to her. My first instinct was to think it was all in my head. But the more I tried to push the thought away, the stronger it became, like an echo that wouldn't fade. I had experienced moments like this before, but I'll admit, it always amazed me when God spoke so clearly. It was as if he placed the key to a door in my hand and waited to see if I had the courage to open it. As the music came to an end, I stood there, motionless, feeling a mix of peace and nervousness. I knew that saying yes could affect my budget, but I also knew that ignoring that voice might rob me of the chance to live a testimony I would carry for the rest of my life. What struck me most was that even in the middle of my fear, there was a spark of faith burning inside me, as if God was about to write a brand new page in my story. As soon as I left the church, that instruction wouldn't leave me alone. Part of me kept saying, "Harmony, you already have too many bills to pay. This isn't the right time to do that." The other part reminded me, if it was God who spoke, he knows exactly what he's asking for. And in that back and forth of thoughts, my mind became a battlefield. It's interesting how faith and fear can sometimes share the same space inside us. On my way home, I started running numbers in my head. The rent, the groceries for the month, the electric bill. Everything seemed to feel tighter just thinking about setting that money aside. But at the same time, I remembered all the times God had provided when I thought I wouldn't make it. This wasn't the first time he had asked me for something that seemed impossible. But this time, the weight of it felt greater. It wasn't just about money. It was about fully trusting him. When I got home, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring into nothing. I knew that if I said yes, I would be placing my security in his hands in a way I couldn't take back. And yet, something inside me kept saying that true security wasn't in my bank account, but in obeying the voice I had heard. Still, before making any decision, I needed to seek clarity. That night, I closed my bedroom door and knelt beside my bed. My prayer began with a hesitant whisper. God, if this is from you, give me clarity. Every word carried both expectation and fear. My mind kept trying to drift toward everyday worries, but my heart wouldn't let go. I needed to hear from God if this step was truly what he wanted. I stayed there for hours, moving between pleading and silence, like someone waiting for a close friend to reply to an important message. I asked him for signs, not big miracles, but that quiet confirmation that only comes through faith. I remembered other times in my life when obedience had led to unexpected blessings. And I had the feeling something similar was about to happen. Prayer became more than asking. It was listening, feeling, and trusting without seeing. As the night went on, a subtle peace began to replace my anxiety. I still had questions, but something inside me was starting to settle. Trusting was the only way forward in this dilemma. And in that moment, I realized God wasn't just hearing me. He was already preparing the answer even before I knew how it would all unfold. The next morning, I picked up my Bible from my personal devotional. As I flipped through the pages, my eyes landed on a passage that felt like it had been written just for me. All God asks is that we trust and act, even when human logic tells us to hold back. That reading brought me instant clarity, as if a light had suddenly illuminated the path I needed to take. I felt with every fiber of my being that the time to act had come. As I read the passage again, I saw how God works in ways that are subtle yet precise. He doesn't shout, he doesn't force, he simply places signs, confirmations, and opportunities in front of us. And in that moment, everything inside me aligned. Fear, doubt, and insecurity gave way to a steady faith, the kind that doesn't waver even in the face of the unknown. It was as if my heart was getting ready for a leap I couldn't fully see yet. I walked away from my devotional with a fresh, light conviction, unlike anything I had felt before. I knew I needed to trust and act right away. It was time to turn that message into a concrete step of faith, placing it in Monica's hands, a step that would change not only her life, but my story as well. After the service, I took a deep breath and walked over to Monica, who was still chatting with a few people by the church entrance. My heart was racing, a mix of anticipation and nervousness. Handing her the envelope with part of my paycheck might have seemed small, but at the same time, it felt huge. A simple gesture, yet loaded with faith and trust in God. I knew this moment was more than financial help. It was a tangible step of obedience to what he had asked of me. Monica looked surprised when I held out the envelope. Her eyes reflected disbelief, mixed with gratitude. I didn't say much. I simply told her this was from God and that he wanted me to help her. The moment she accepted it, I felt a wave of peace wash over me, as if the weight of fear had been replaced by something much greater. The certainty that obedience always bears fruit, even before we see the results. As I walked away, I realized that small act had changed the atmosphere around me. The sense of peace was so strong, it felt impossible to keep it to myself. I knew that step of faith wasn't just about Monica or the money. It was about learning to trust completely, even when we don't have all the answers, and about allowing God to write the story in ways we could never imagine. Monica's eyes filled with tears the moment she opened the envelope. She held my hand and, with a trembling voice, told me that the money was exactly what she needed to pay her rent in that difficult month. In that instant, every bit of fear and doubt I had felt turned into a deep, quiet joy. It's amazing how God allows us to witness his care through each other's hands. As she spoke, I felt an unexplainable connection. It wasn't just about the financial help, but about the trust and obedience we had both put into action. Every word of gratitude she spoke seemed to echo inside my own heart, reminding me that when we obey God, even the smallest gestures can have a huge impact on someone's life. That moment taught me that the true reward of faith isn't always in what we receive, but in what we're able to give. Monica's gratitude was a reflection of what God does when we allow him to lead us. And even though I didn't realize it yet, something greater was starting to take shape in my own story, something far beyond what I could imagine. After handing over the envelope, I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced in a long time. It was as if an invisible burden had been lifted from my shoulders, leaving space for peace to fill my heart. Obeying God, even in a simple act, had transformed me in a way that money or praise never could. I could finally breathe without that constant tightness of worry. As I walked home, I noticed that life felt different. It wasn't the world around me that had changed, but my perspective. The faith that had once been quiet now had a voice, and I felt that every step, every decision, could be guided by that trust in God. Monica's story was just the beginning of something bigger that I couldn't see yet, but I could already feel it stirring inside me. That night, as I lay in bed, I reflected on the power of obedience. Even without knowing what would come next, I knew that doing God's will brought a peace that nothing in this world could buy. And deep down, a curious feeling arose. Something told me that this lightness was just the first of many surprises he had prepared for my story. The week started out seemingly normal. Waking up early, making my coffee, heading to work, meetings, and reports. Everything seemed to follow the usual rhythm, but there was a strange feeling in the air, a quiet intuition that something unseen was happening behind the scenes. It was as if life had set small details in motion that I couldn't fully notice yet. Even at the office, my interactions with colleagues felt different. I smiled more, listened more closely, and felt that every gesture carried more meaning. Something inside me had changed. The faith that guided me to help Monica not only transformed my heart, but it began to influence the way I saw every small action in daily life. It was a reminder that God works in subtle ways, preparing the ground for what's to come. At the end of the workday, as I packed up my things, a sense of anticipation took over. I didn't know exactly what to expect, but there was a constant whisper in my heart. Get ready, something is coming. And even without seeing it, I trusted that my story with God was about to take a new step. In the middle of the afternoon, my phone rang with an unexpected message. Mr. Harold Whitmore wanted to see me in his office. My heart raced, a mix of anxiety and curiosity. It wasn't common for him to call me in without a reason, and I immediately imagined every possible scenario. Some good, some not so much. But something inside me said, trust. Everything is in God's hands. When I entered his office, he greeted me with his usual smile, but there was a different light in his eyes. He invited me to sit and began talking about my performance, highlighting my commitment, attention to detail, and dedication. Every word seemed to echo inside me, and I felt a quiet gratitude to God for that recognition, knowing it wasn't just a coincidence. As he continued, my mind went back to the step of faith I had taken with Monica. A curious thought entered my heart. Could it be that God was somehow weaving each of my actions into his purpose? The feeling that something greater was at work stayed with me, even after I left his office, still smiling and with my heart racing. Mr. Harold Whitmore took a deep breath and said, with that serious yet considerate tone, "Harmony, your work has stood out. We want to promote you." In that moment, I felt a mix of disbelief and excitement run through me. Every acknowledgement, every quiet effort in the office finally seemed to be appreciated, and I knew that God had prepared that moment far beyond what I could have imagined. As he explained the details of the promotion, my mind went back to the previous week, to that step of faith I had taken by helping Monica. I couldn't help but notice the invisible connection between obeying God and experiencing unexpected blessings. It was as if he had taught me a lesson. When we trust, he turns every act of faith into doors we never imagined. In that moment, caught between surprise and gratitude, I realized that my prayers, My decisions and my trust had not been in vain. Every word of recognition from my boss was, in some way, a reflection of God's faithfulness in my life. I felt lighter, stronger in my faith, and ready to testify that sometimes the impossible becomes possible in ways only He can make happen. I left the office still absorbing every word Mr. Whitmore had said. My heart overflowed with an emotion that mixed tears and smiles, a feeling so intense it was impossible to contain. The promotion wasn't just professional recognition. It was a tangible reminder that God honors faith and obedience even when no one else sees our efforts. As I walked back to my desk, my mind went to Monica and that small envelope I had carefully carried just days before. It was amazing to see how an act of faith, done quietly, could connect to something so grand and unexpected in my own life. The story of obedience was starting to unfold, showing that every step taken with God has effects far beyond what we can measure. I felt a deep, silent gratitude. The tears that fell weren't from sadness, but from a recognition of God's faithfulness. That moment was a reminder that life with God is full of surprises and unexpected rewards, and that the story He writes for each of us is far greater than anything our own plans could achieve. At the end of the day, I met with Natalie Corbin, my close friend and confidant, for a coffee to share everything that had happened. I barely started explaining when the tears came, not just because of the promotion, but because I realized how God had guided every detail of the situation. Natalie listened attentively, and together we reflected on how faith, even in small acts, can transform stories in surprising ways. As I spoke about Monica, the donation, and that step of obedience, I realized my own experience was becoming a living testimony. Natalie smiled and remarked how every choice made in God's guidance seemed to open invisible doors, bringing lessons that money or recognition could never teach. It was in that moment I understood. My story wasn't just mine. It could inspire others to trust and act as well. Talking with her made me see that sharing experiences of faith strengthens our own confidence. The more we talk about God's actions in our lives, the more we connect with the reality that He works quietly in the details, preparing surprises we often don't even expect. And there, over that coffee, I felt that my story was only just beginning to unfold before my eyes. The following Sunday, I was invited to share my story during the church's testimony service. My heart was pounding as I stood before the congregation, noticing that every pair of eyes on me carried curiosity and expectation. I wasn't there just to talk about a promotion or a financial gesture, but to show how faith and obedience to God can transform lives in unexpected ways. As I spoke about Monica, the step of faith, and God's responses, I felt a unique energy fill the room. Some people wiped away tears, others smiled and nodded, and I realized that every word had the power to touch hearts. Sharing my testimony became more than a personal story. It was a quiet invitation for everyone there to reflect on their own faith and on the opportunities God places before us. At the end, looking out at the congregation, I realized that something had changed within me as well. It wasn't just about having obeyed or received blessings. It was about understanding that our story with God comes alive when we share it. Every testimony, every experience shared helps others recognize God's presence and inspires the courage to act in faith, even in the face of the unknown. After the service, Monica came up to me, her eyes shining with emotion. She shared how that money had saved her home during that difficult month, allowing her to pay the rent and give her children a bit of peace. I could see her gratitude overflowing, and my heart filled with a quiet joy. It was the tangible result of a step of faith that had seemed so simple, yet carried so much power. As we talked, I realized how God works in ways we can't anticipate. A small act done in faith and obedience to his voice had completely changed Monica's life while also reaffirming my own trust. Her story reminded me that our actions, even the quiet ones, have far-reaching effects, and that God always honors obedience. That moment with Monica taught me that faith comes alive when put into practice. It's not just about silent prayers or internal feelings, but about concrete actions that reflect our trust in God. And as I watched hope shine in her eyes, I realized that obedience always bears fruit, often in ways and places we never could have imagined. As I concluded my story, I felt my heart overflow with gratitude. Every step I took, every silent prayer, and every act of faith had been guided by God, and He proved once again that He is faithful. Obedience, even when challenging, opened doors I could never have imagined, showing that trusting Him transforms not only our lives, but also the lives of those around us. As I reflected on the whole experience, I realized the story wasn't just about me, but about how God works through us. He uses our steps of faith to impact lives in quiet and powerful ways. And it's in this intertwining of stories, hearts, and obedient actions that the true beauty of the Christian journey is revealed. Today, when I look back, I see that obedience opens paths that human logic could never explain. God is faithful, and His presence shows up in both the small and big decisions we make. Every story of faith, every act of trust becomes a living testimony of His work in our lives, inspiring others to walk boldly and believe that He always fulfills His promises. Today, I know that obeying God changed not only Monica and her children's lives, but also my own. If I had ignored that gentle voice, I might never have experienced what it truly means to live under His provision and care. And now I ask you, how many times has God spoken to you and you've pretended not to hear? How many opportunities to change a life have passed right before your eyes because fear or logic spoke louder? Isn't it time to stop putting it off and start obeying? If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the Faith Story channel. Here you'll find real testimonies showing how God is still at work today. And just as I had this space to share my experience, you can have yours too. Share your testimony in the comments because we never know how your story might be the answer someone has been praying for. So, tell me, what step of faith is God asking you to take today?